Time now for our rants and raves, starting with Dan.
So I have a rave for the PEC, which is the Press Emblem campaign. This is a nonprofit organization made up of mostly journalists who are working to protect journalists who go into hot zones or conflict zones, not only from a physical protection standpoint, but also legally. Well, since the coronavirus broke out, frankly, since 2020, March of 2020, they have been keeping track of how many journalists have died around the world from the coronavirus. And the count currently sits at 1,034 across 73 countries. And it's tragic, right? These are the journalists who are going out and having to cover the pandemic while at the same time putting themselves at great risk. I understand millions have died all around the world, but journalists, that's what we do. And it's good to pay attention when something like this hits our own. And not only do they pay attention, they keep track of the names, also post a little note about them with a photo, and that count continues.
All right, Joanna.
So I have a rant for the editor-in-chief of the website Insider, which is formerly Business Insider. There was a memo that he wrote that was leaked this week about impact points, which was a way of judging the staff. So they're trying to get away from just judging your success by page views, which is good. But instead, they have a whole list of what counts and what doesn't count for judging the impact of your story. So, for instance, you get an impact point if your story is referenced in a title with a great deal of prestige, whatever that means, on social media accounts with more than 1 million followers. But you don't get points for being mentioned on local radio, and you don't get points for journalists on Twitter unless the journalist is huge. So, quantifying the work of journalism is hard.
I guess they're not going to get any impact because we're talking about them, huh?
Sadly, I don't know if they're going to get any impact points. But props to the staff of Business Insider who received 260 impact points for the month of March.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. Oh, my God. All right, Jon.
So I have a rave for Court TV. If you want to follow, for my money, the biggest story in the country right now, the Chauvin murder trial, you really need to be watching Court TV. You may remember Court TV was big back in the 90s, the O.J. Simpson case, etc. With wall-to-wall coverage of interesting trials. They moved away from that over the years, and the brand vanished altogether around 2008. But it's back, and with the focus again on wall-to-wall coverage of these trials. I have a job where I'm able to keep an eye on it all day long, and it's great. If you don't, you can still tune in prime time and get really extended coverage, more than the networks will give you, plus really interesting, sometimes off the usual grid panelists analyzing what you've seen. Well worth checking out Court TV.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jon, because when they went off their mission, well, that's because they had a lot of competition too, but when they were the original, that was where you went to find, court trials all day long, Lacey Peterson, you name it, all those trials, and then they just vanished. So I agree with you. All right, Adam.
I have a rave for Laura Bassett, a high-powered political freelancer, political reporter. Before I give the rave, if you're a parent watching at home with your kids, you may have to have an awkward conversation with them after my rave, so be forewarned and act accordingly. Laura Bassett caught a man uploading pictures of her feet to a site called WikiFeet, a site for foot fetishists. She decided that she wanted to do a Q&A with this man. She did it for The Cut, and it is the most incredibly cringeworthy and also totally fascinating thing that I've read in the last month. Easy. If you're interested in really, really strange subcultures, check it out. You will not forget it.
Okay, Adam. I'll be checking that out because that is definitely a bizarre one.
It's bizarre.
All right. Well, tonight I have a rave for NBC, and this is a little bit tricky because it's a very sensitive story, and that is that they used the full-face picture of that young boy, a migrant from Mexico, presumably, or Guatemala, I think he was. And he was left wandering on the Texas border. The group that he had been traveling with just deserted him, maybe because they thought he'd be better off alone. We really don't know. But he ran into some customs officials, and they stopped him, and he started explaining what had happened to him. Now, some of the other sites, CBS and a couple other news sites, decided to go with the blurred image, but frankly, seeing that little boy's face, and he was so young, and he already had the tired bags under his eyes and the emotion in his face and in his voice, it really told a story that I think you couldn't see or you couldn't feel, you couldn't sense quite as dramatically if the picture was blurred. So I credit NBC for doing that.